I want to talk about China under communism. The East is red. It's a brave new world, communism on trial. That's the name of the chapter. Here you see the flag of communist China and also a quote from Mao. A revolution is not a dinner party or writing an essay or doing embroidery. It cannot be so refined, so leisurely and gentle, so temperate and kind, courteous, restrained, and magnanimous. A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. We want to take a look at how China becomes communist. And we kind of covered this before, but just a little review. During World War II, you remember towards the first part of the 20th century, China was controlled by European powers and had really declined. The end of the 19th century, early 20th century, was controlled by Germany, Britain, and others, different sections of it. But as the Japanese rose as an imperial power, they came to control large parts of China. You can see on this map the areas that are in the blue color here, sort of bluish color. All of that territory belonged to Japan in 1941. The other two groups that control China is the elected government, which are the sometimes called the Chinese nationalists, and they had a democracy, and their areas in the green. But then you can see the pockets here in the northern part of the country. There's reddish in color. Those are the communist Chinese. Now, the United States was a strong ally of China. Well, part of the rationale was, you can see the proximity of China to Japan, is that the United States felt they would need to use China as a way to land troops in Japan to take it with an amphibious assault. And also, they wanted the Russian help, the Soviet help, to do that at the end of towards the end of World War II. However, the United States developed a nuclear weapon, or weapons, at least two weapons, which they ended up using both of them on Japan and got them to surrender. Therefore, this invasion never happened, saving probably thousands upon thousands of lives. But when the war was over, one of the deals is that the Soviets wanted territory that the Japanese had, and so we see that they will take over most of all this blue territory here, especially in the north, and of course the northern part of Korea. So we see then you have the nationalists under the leader Chiang Kai-shek. He is the elected official of China. And you have rebels, communist rebels under Mao Zedong. And they are more powerful, as you can see, in the north. What Mao did was work with landless farmers in the north and promised them land and so forth, and created a large military there. Now, Mao is helped greatly by the Soviets, who are also communists, and in fact they will turn over Manchuria to basically to Mao. And we see then that when the Civil War, in the midst of this Chinese Civil War, Mao will eventually drive the nationalist forces out of mainland China onto the island of Taiwan. And that's still where they are today. Taiwan is still an independent country, although lives under the shadow of communist China. Now, when it first started, Mao will emulate Stalin and have 5-year plans. This will be his way of doing this. He wants to increase the industrial output of China. And of course, he's going to do that in much the same way. He's going to collectivize farms. And you can see a picture here of, I don't know how many are there, 100 or more people who are out in large fields here. I think these are rice paddies, although huge ones. and they are cultivating this. In other words, he took all the small farms, he took all the land away from the farmers, put it in the hands of the government, made these huge collective farms. And so we can see then what happens in 1958, the second five-year plan comes to be called the Great Leap Forward. And here he'll move people from villages to large communes. Now, it ended up being a disaster in many ways. The Chinese culture had always been centered around the family and the family unit, but now that family unit is being forcibly divided up in these communes, also the farms are being divided up this way. So this did not work well. Production on the farms greatly decreased, and we see a huge famine coming to China, where it's estimated at least 15 million people starved to death because of low production of crops and so forth. Well, Mao's still in charge, and so we'll see he decides to copy Lenin's new economic plan, or NEP, and he is using capitalism to build the economy because the economy was so low. He uses this to build the economy before he was going to impose any communist ideals on the land. Like we said, the farms were seized, large family lands given to poor farmers. That appeased the very poor who got the land. But in the end, this led to a great deal of violence. The economy had improved, but the agricultural production was lagging behind. So here you see one of the kind of typical posters of the period, communist posters. You see how happy everyone is, and they're all smiling and going off to work together. The soldier, the farmer, so forth. Everybody is happy, everybody is working, all towards a wonderful China. Well, Mao decides to, once he has things sort of established, to sort of fully bring forth the revolution. And to do that, they would have to cleanse Chinese society. There were too many of the old ways, too many of the old ideas. And so he forms the Red Guard. The Red Guard was made up mostly of young people who were energetic and committed, and some sort of radical members of the Communist Party who wanted a pure communism. So they were going to cleanse Chinese society. They would punish enemies of Chinese society, of the Communist Party and so forth. They would be publicly humiliated and punished, sometimes even executed. Anyone who was taking the capitalistic road is the way it was called. Anyone who wasn't holding pure to communism. And so we see, so anyone who was thought to hold the capitalistic ideas, following what they called the capitalistic road, was going to be punished. So this great, what was officially called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, will last for a decade, from 1966 to 1976. In this was a cleansing of all the old ways. So the teachings of Confucius, which had been the backbone of Chinese culture, will be removed. You're not supposed to talk about Confucius. You're not supposed to quote him and so forth. It had been common for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years in China. No longer approved of. Mao taught that they needed an uninterrupted revolution to really bring about the communist state, a more purified communist state. And he wrote what was called his Little Red Book, and you see here in the picture these young devotees all have a copy of Mao's book. They're all reading the book, and in it would be short sayings, much like sort of like Confucius, except with all the communist teachings of Mao. The Cultural Revolution could be brutal. And in fact, anyone who was considered to be not following the line could be publicly humiliated, as you see these men, forced to stand on a chair in front of everyone with a sign around their neck giving their crimes or their wrong beliefs. And they were also forced many times to wear a large hat, a tall hat, which listed their the things that they had done wrong. These are sometimes called the dunce cap in the West, but and you see this man's also been beaten. So they could be publicly beaten, humiliated, and even executed for their ideas. The Cultural Revolution has been compared by many to the reign of terror of the French Revolution. And so we see the excesses of the reign of terror here in the Cultural Revolution. The Red Guard tortured and killed thousands of people. They wanted to wipe out what was called the four olds: old thought, old culture, old customs, and old habits. They would tear down temples, street signs that had the wrong kinds of names on it. And in Shanghai, the order came out to even change the traffic lights so that the color red, which was the symbol of the Communist Party, would no longer mean to stop, but to go, because red was the color of progress. Red was the color of the Communist Party. So it just shows how far they would go. Now here is a map of modern China. You can see in it how much their territory has expanded, how far they have come to over close to India, even disputed territories with India. And of course their takeover of Tibet in 1950 is considered to be quite controversial by many. And we see then their influence on North Korea as well. And of course here's North Korea, and here you can see Taiwan, still the Republic of China in Taiwan. So when China is very powerful, like it is today, they control a large territory that would be as much territory as, say, the United States. That's how large they are. Well, change of leadership. Mao dies in 1976, and we're going to see that Deng Xiaoping will come to power. He is more pragmatic than Mao. He will rule from 76 until, I guess, 97. He ended the Cultural Revolution because it was so feared and considered to be excessive by some people in the Communist Party even. And so he ends it there. And he brings about what he calls the four modernizations. He wanted to modernize industry, agriculture, technology, and national defense. And so you see these four people here represent the four modernizations. One is a soldier, I guess, one is technology, one is agriculture, so forth. So this was the plan, and in fact, he also changed the idea, what we might call, into capitalism or free enterprise. He allowed people to work to benefit themselves. Instead of seeing that as an enemy of China, he saw it as improving not only their lives, but overall the lives of all of China. While Mao's slogan was "Serve the people," Deng Xiaoping's motto will be "Create wealth for the people." And so this is the way in which it will develop. And so things become basically more mixed with some capitalism or free enterprise, where people could make some money on their own. On a very small level, but of course all large industries were owned by the government. And here's a picture of Deng Xiaoping. Well, controversy still comes. China is making progress. Poverty does decline. However, with these progresses, many people are wanting full democracy, actually. And democracy had not been included in this. This is going to lead to protests, especially in 1989, in the spring of 1989. They will begin, and they will culminate in June of 1989. As you can see this picture here, there are thousands of people at Tiananmen Square, which is a huge square right in the center of Beijing. What you can see there in the background, that is the Forbidden City is back there. This is the old part of the city. But out in front of it is this massive square. It's the largest public square in the world, at least that's what they claim. And it's just filled, as you can see, with thousands and thousands of people. Well, the government, when this gathering takes place in June 4th, 1989, they finally decide this is out of hand. They must bring a stop to it. And so, in fact, they send troops out to try to disperse the crowds. They figured if they brought the troops out in force, some of them would shoot over their heads and that sort of thing. Everybody would clear out, and that would be the end of it. However, the people did not clear out. In fact, they kept setting up barricades to the troops and to the armed personnel carriers and so forth. Finally, the troops end up firing into the crowds. And the number of people killed is really not known because most of the information about this has been suppressed in China. But certainly hundreds were killed, no doubt, and probably thousands upon thousands were killed before the end of that day. So this is a turning point, I guess you would say. After this, the government will arrest dissidents. Unknown numbers are rounded up, thrown into prison, and many of them executed that way, much more quietly, to try to bring this in line with what the government would want. So you see the massive crowds here. Here you see their calls, even in English, they put the signs up, "Give me democracy," or "Give me death." And so many of them did die. The next day, on June 5th, 1989, this becomes a sort of iconic symbol of what it is. There's actually some video of this you can find online as well. This is called, by people in the West, Tank Man, because nobody knows the guy's name for sure. But all the tanks were rolling. I think there were about 5 or 6 of them here you could see in the video. And he just comes out, stands in front of the tank. When the tank tries to go around him, he keeps moving. And finally the tanks all line up behind this first tank. And he has blocked the tanks that way. So we see then, in the end, the economy after this point, because they change presidents in 1989, and this is probably as a result of all the protests. And we see that rapid growth is promoted, but heavily suppressing any dissidents. So they call this period, some people call it this idea, this proverb from China, when you ride a tiger, it's hard to dismount. And so the idea here is that the Chinese have started riding the tiger, and the tiger is progress and change and economic development, which of course they're becoming a major world leader. But of course, it's hard then to control the outcome of these things. Continued growth, but what has happened in China is a growing distinction between rich and poor, between urban and rural. And the most recent president, Xiaoping, he became president in 2012. He said he wanted to bring the Chinese dream and attack corruption. but he ends up strengthening state-owned businesses, and he has attacked his adversaries. But one thing is sure, China has become a world power and will, I think, only become stronger in the future. This is why many people are calling the 21st century the Asian century, whereas the 20th century was the American century. So we'll see what happens there. Now here from your textbook, you can see a kind of outline of China under the communist rule, just for you to review. We didn't mention the Olympic Games held in Beijing in 2008, but this was a major turning point and brought China onto the world stage. And then also from your textbook, this timeline, which shows you the various areas that are here, and also compares it with things going on in Europe and the Soviet Union. We'll end it there for now.